Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda. That's a new twist, and that was Matt May and David having a little fun, and Rhonda will read some stuff, but I just want to welcome you, Matt, to the podcast. I'm just thrilled to be having the chance to work with you again. And for all of those of you who don't know Matt, he's a former student and now esteemed colleague and practices here in Menlo Park, California. And for years, for decades, I've been saying he's probably the greatest therapist in the world. And if that's not true, it's really close to true, and it's probably entirely true. And so it's a real treat to be working with you and hanging out with you, Matt. We're constantly getting feedback from people that Matt, what did you say recently, is like, walks on water or something? Or
yeah, I said Matt walks on water. Right?
Yeah, and we hear that from a lot of people that you've worked with.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm blushing over here and just loving hearing that, David. Thank you. That's so kind.
Yeah.
And I actually owe it all to you. You taught me everything I know, and we're so generous in your training.
Yeah, we had fun, and we're still having fun, although not as often as we used to when we'd get together every week for 2 or 3 hours and talk cases and talk personal issues, and really the heavens kind of opened up, and I'll never forget those days.
Me either. Those were wonderful days, and you knew the best pizza spot in town as well, as I recall.
Yeah, it's gone now, sadly. But anyway, let's get ready to rumble here. Rhonda, what do you have for us?
This is episode 244, and I want to welcome all of our listeners around the country and around the world to this great episode. And we're going to be talking with Matt and David about paradox within the TEAM model.
Now, your voice is very scratchy, I think, because the microphone is touching your teeth.
Okay.
Yeah, that's much better. Yeah.
Okay, because last time people said I was too quiet. So I thought I'd start off by reading. Somebody wrote to you. I think he or she asked you to send them some of the free copies of the free chapters of your Feeling Great book, which you responded immediately and sent to him. And then he wrote, "You are the best psychology professor that has ever come to this world. Even your answer was very important to me. It's a good thing you exist. I hope you live forever and live happily."
What a kind comment. Thank you for that. So we've got the best psychology teacher on the surface of the earth, the greatest psychiatrist and psychotherapist on the surface of the earth, and the greatest podcast host on the surface of the earth.
Wow. There's a lot to say to us.
This is called, this podcast will be on narcissism.
Right. Well, we just published a podcast 239 on April 26th on the 10 days to self-esteem that Dawn O'Mealy, on your book that Dawn O'Mealy runs her groups. And we got a podcast that says, "Wow, Dawn is amazing." We got an endorsement. Sorry. "Wow, Dawn is amazing. I'd be fascinated to see the data that she has acquired, like her brief mood surveys before and after the classes. She has a lot of proof that the homework works."
Yeah, and we were so impressed with her, and Jeremy Carmel's very impressed with her, and we might try to hitch up with her some more and have her branch out so she's not just working with people in Delaware, but can work with people from all over the world doing her 10 Days to Self-Esteem groups and maybe some Feeling Great groups as well, because she just has a whole lot of personality and a lot of great ideas, and I think she would just be so fun for anyone to work with who wants to join a weekly group on how to use cognitive therapy and team therapy to change the way you think and feel, and she makes it really like a fun thing too.
Okay, well, let's dive into our topic. And actually, David and Matt, could you please define what you mean by paradox as we start today's episode on paradox? But
well,
don't define it paradoxically.
I'll leave that to Matt, but I'll say our show, I've decided to call it The Power of Paradox, because I've been asking, why is it that TEAM seems so much more powerful than other forms of therapy, or even the cognitive therapy I was originally so closely involved with, and I think that paradox has an awful lot of it to do with it. And there's this phenomenal definition of paradox that will totally blow your mind, and Matt will now share it with us.
I thought that you might be setting me up for that, David. Well, I don't know. I could make a stab at defining paradox as communication that appears to be trying to talk someone into keeping their current thoughts alive, arguing in favor of keeping the thoughts, actually causes a change in those thoughts. So that would be one definition of paradox, that we would cling to some negative thinking for some reason, and that if we as the therapist argue that seems pretty good to keep thinking that way, that's when our patient will argue back. And so the paradox is, the more I try to convince someone to change their thinking, the more they'll dig in and resist, and the more I'm trying to see why their thinking is awesome the way it is, the more free they are to let go of it.
Yeah, that's right. And do you remember Rena Sugarbaker, or was that her name, or Sugarman, or was it Sugarbaker?
Sugarbaker, yeah, I do.
Yeah, she was neat. She was a psychiatric resident also at Stanford, and during one of her supervision sessions, we created the technique called externalization of resistance. And I hadn't been focusing on it much until Tuesday. We featured it in a Tuesday group and taught it to the group. And people have found it incredibly powerful and helpful for their patients. And now I'm thinking it's maybe one of the most important team techniques, but it's what you just said. You ask the patient to list all the reasons to beat up on yourself, and what does it show about you that's positive and awesome, and what does it show about your high standards, and what does your guilt show about you that's really positive and beautiful, and what's great about your depression, and all these things are that are the opposite of what we're trained to do as mental health professionals. And then for example, in my small group Tuesday, one of the participants was a young therapist who was feeling insecure in the group and was terrified of doing a role play, and her negative thoughts people will think I'm dumb, and I am dumb, and they'll see I'm not as good as the others, and I'll never be as good as the other people in this group, and all these battering herself with these negative thoughts. And then we made a list of what do these things show about you that's positive and awesome, and what are some advantage to you of having all these negative thoughts. And then she came up with a list of 10 things, like it shows I have high standards, and shows I'm sensitive and really care about the other people in the group, and motivates me to work hard, and on and on and on. And then we all became the part of her mind that didn't want to change, and started trying to persuade her not to change, just saying, well, gosh, you don't want to give up these self-critical thoughts because they're really the key to your success, and they show that you have high standards, and your anxiety and guilt and shame shows what a sensitive and beautiful person you are, and all of this. And at first she struggled, and then she started knocking them out of the park. And that took about 10 minutes. And then we started hitting her with her negative thoughts, and she blew them all away in about 5 minutes. And then suddenly your anxiety vanished completely. So that's exactly what you said, Matt. That's it's a tremendous paradox, and there's a reason why it works so well, and that reason is.
Well, I can see this is going to be a long podcast for me. Maybe because the resistance component is so important that while a part of us is wanting to maintain our current patterns of thinking, other methods don't work, and any effort to change that thinking will fall flat.
Yeah, I think anytime someone tries to sell us on something, like a used car or something, we have a tendency to start yes-butting and putting up resistance. And here we're going in the opposite direction and showing some real empathy and understanding of why the person is depressed or angry or hopeless or whatever, and cast those motives in a flattering light. And the therapist gives up this attempt to help the patient. But that's what I was trained in, helping the patient. You should help this defective patient. And that forces many people to kind of fight back and resist. And then when you go in the opposite direction, it sometimes, in fact, almost always just the heavens open up, and suddenly the person is just hungry, ready, and willing to change.
That's right. Yeah. Go ahead, Rhonda.
Isn't that a bit absurd and contradictory? Like just what you were talking about, David, somebody saying to you, I'm dumb in the Tuesday class. And you say, oh, yeah, well, what does that thought say about you? That's positive and awesome and an advantage. Like, isn't that kind of absurd?
Yeah, it sounds absurd. That a lot of the things in team therapy sound absurd, and that's why they're really hard for people to grasp. But one thing about this young woman telling herself I'm dumb is she's really a gentle and humble person. She seemed actually extremely bright, but it was a genuinely beautiful thing about her. And once she saw that, she wasn't married to that concept anymore. That's the paradox. Once you see the beauty in your suffering and in your negative thoughts and feelings, suddenly you won't need them anymore. Maybe it's partly because we're listening to what our negative thoughts and feelings are trying to tell us, but there's a lot of other reasons as well why this can be so helpful. But this is only 1/3 of the paradoxes in TEAM. There's a paradox in T in the testing. There's paradoxes in the E equals empathy. There's paradoxing that you just pointed out, Matt, in the A equals the assessment of resistance or paradoxical agenda setting, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot of paradoxes in the M equals methods. Why don't we focus on the paradoxes in E equals empathy? Because the idea here is our patients are measuring us, rating our empathy every session at the end with the empathy scale, for example. And the empathy scale is set up that it's so easy to get failing grades. Anything other than a perfect score is a failing grade. And most therapists get almost all failing grades initially. Although I can remember even when you were a resident, you were getting mainly perfect grades, Matt. And so what part of team therapy is we're hoping for failing grades on empathy. Why would that be, Matt? Because that's a paradox.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's an opportunity for the therapist to learn and grow, and also for the patient to learn and grow if we get curious and try to understand the nature of that failure, that we can do it together. And if the therapist isn't taking it personally and can really see how they failed the patient, then there's even greater empathy that develops as a result of that. Is that what you were thinking of?
Yeah. It causes the very breakthrough that the patient is looking for in their life. Someone who will finally listen to me. But it's often at the expense of the therapist's ego. Do you, Rhonda, or you, Matt, ever feel threatened or ashamed or disturbed by a fierce criticism from a patient or a colleague? I guess we should focus on patients.
Frequently, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because I've never had that experience. Like what kind of things, and then how do you sometimes feel, and then why can that be a good thing?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had an experience just last week when a patient gave me a 16 out of 20 for empathy, and my reaction was kind of shock because I thought, wow, how else could I have been? How could I thought I was listening. I thought I was reflecting. I thought I was commenting on I thought her feelings and expressing my feelings. And so this week when I saw her, I brought it up, and I didn't notice that I said one thing to her that I thought was just kind of a throwaway comment. And that one comment impacted the rest of the time that we spent together. And there was like a break in our relationship. And the fact that I could then, tell her that she was right and admit my mistake and, talk about her feelings and express my remorse and regret and my hope for a better connection in the future. And that created a warmth and connection between us that I don't think would have existed if I hadn't failed in that moment.
Right.
And then been able to repair it.
Yeah,
and
I love that.
I felt better. And she felt better too, and that was reflected in that week's.
And is testing. That one of the things the Buddha was talking about when he talked about the great death?
Yes, the death of the ego.
Yeah,
because I had to let my ego die and say, "You're right, I messed up."
Yeah. Also, in our training is based on failure, and some therapists don't want this kind of training that we do in a Tuesday group, and yours, I think, is a Thursday group. Is it, Matt, a Thursday?
Yeah, I'm running 2 training groups on Thursdays. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Are these open to people, by the way, who might want to train with you?
So these are through the Feeling Good Institute, and they're for level 3 certified folks. And
oh, I see.
Yeah,
I see. You should do one for the general public, then we can send thousands in your direction, because our audience,
great. Actually, I would really like that.
Yeah, our audience right now is both therapists and the general public, but they're all hungry for some really good teaching that would be available to them. So if you cook up something, we'll push it hard on the podcasts. What I was going to say is that, as you know, Matt, the way we teach empathy is we have someone play the role of the critical patient, and then someone play the role as the therapist. The therapist is supposed to respond with what we call the 5 secrets of effective communication. And nearly always in these role plays, the therapist doesn't do a good job, and then they get a grade right away, a B, a C, maybe, a D, maybe. And they're all thinking, boy, I hope I got an A in front of everybody, and then you don't. And so that's also the death of the therapist's ego, that others in the group will see that your empathy skills really are not good. But again, that's a paradox, because if you're willing to see that, you can learn super fast. But you have to be willing to be open and see that what's being criticized is specific techniques you're using or not using. We're not criticizing yourself, but therapists, like patients, have the idea they have this self, and that is where an awful lot of human suffering comes from, the belief that you have a self that maybe isn't good enough. But that's again, the paradoxical nature of TEAM, and we say when you come to the Tuesday group, you learn through joyous failure, and fail joyously. Again, that's another paradox, but it's serious, because I was listening to a workshop last week for 3 minutes. I was presenting in this workshop. It was a symposium in Canada, and so I think each presenter went for an hour and a half or something, so I just happened to come in a little early. And this fellow was talking in these very abstract terms about 3 big words was his presentation. I don't remember what the words were, but it was all kind of very theoretical. And it struck me that no one ever learned how to communicate. And I also saw someone sent me tips on communication that she was just so proud that she'd published on her blog, and do this and don't do this. And it just occurred to me that no one will ever learn from those kinds of presentations. You only learn by practicing and failing as a therapist. And similarly, you only deepen the therapeutic relationship when you fail and you get the feedback from the patient that they weren't happy. And so the failure of the empathic relationship is something to celebrate, not something to fear.
Yeah. I always liked how you set up the exercises when we were practicing, where you would remind us that the second best thing we could be doing would be a perfect job.
Yeah, right.
And the very best thing we could be doing would be to fail and then learn something as a result of that.
Yeah.
And I think the learning is both, at a skill level, but also at an emotional level, that failure is absolutely okay.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know if I remember this properly since I'm elderly and 3/4 demented. But do you remember in the evening group, we were talking about how people can get such rapid recovery with these new techniques, and some of the residents weren't believing it, and I was showing them some of your scores where people were just having dramatic changes within single sessions, and they still didn't believe it. So this is probably all confabulation. I probably have Korsakoff's or something, but my memory was that I told them that when you're on vacation, why don't you just refer your patients to Matt? So he can cover for you. And then what they all found out, they would refer these horribly severe patients to you, and they'd be gone a week, and you'd have a session with the patient. And then when they'd come back from vacation, their patient would be all cured. It was so fantastic. Did that ever happen, or
I'm at least as demented as you, David. So I'm not sure that happened or not. But it is a great story. And I think we should go with it.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now, so that's empathy paradox and therapeutic resistance paradox, and now there's two paradoxes left. One is the testing paradox, where we're testing patients at the beginning and end of every therapy session, and this is the most accountable form of therapy in the world, where therapists have to look at your effectiveness or lack of effectiveness within every single therapy session and find out exactly what % change was there in depression in this session, or was there not, or maybe the patient got worse. What was the change in, if any, in suicidal urges from start to end? What's the change in anxiety and anger, and what's paradoxical about that?
I'm drawing a blank there. I'm not sure what's paradoxical about that.
Well, we're hoping to find out that we did poorly in the session. Most therapists' perceptions of patients are less than 10% accurate at best. And so the first paradox is you're going to find out that you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Right. When I was a resident, I would go to these psychoanalytic supervisors. They'd say, "How did it go?" And, we would talk in these general ways. And I never knew how my patients felt. And my supervisors never knew how I felt. It was like folie à deux, or something like psychotic ramblings without any data. And so, first of all, the data shows you that your perceptions of your patient aren't correct. You might have thought you had a great session, and then the patient got suicidal or something. And you might think you had a terrible session and find out the patient was benefited tremendously from it.
Yeah, that's very true. Right.
But
so the paradox there is that the sense is that we would be hoping to see where we were failing.
Yeah.
Because that would be the thing that clued us into, where recovery was.
Exactly. So we know and can make those rapid adjustments. And another paradox there is the patient becomes our teacher.
Mm.
Yeah.
The greatest teacher in the world is the patient.
That's very true as well.
And a lot of therapists say, "Oh, they won't be honest," but they are honest on the feedback forms, and those forms tell the truth. And the question isn't, will the patients be honest, but does the therapist have the courage to hear what the patient has to say and to see how effective or ineffective you are. Now, most therapists, if they use the brief mood survey, will find out that they're really crappy therapists. People listening right now, they'll find out your patients aren't changing within sessions. So how could that be a good thing?
Well, I think it's better than not knowing for sure, and continuing to do what had been the status quo. But I think to be able to talk about those feelings with the person you're working with would be a deep form of empathy, to acknowledge that. And, source of connection.
Also, learning that you're not doing a good job might be motivating for you to learn something different or to switch what it is that, your technique or your focus or your method.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's the greatest thing in the world to find out you're doing sucky psychotherapy. If you have the courage to know that, and then to say, I want to do something about this and change my strategy with this patient or with all of my patients. So again, most therapists are hoping for success when they're measuring things. We're hoping for failure, so we can find out exactly why we're failing and then have a breakthrough in our understanding when we figure out how to help that person who has been stuck. In fact, that's been the whole story of my career and my life, is trying to learn by measuring when I'm doing good work or great work and when I'm doing crappy work, and then to learn from all of that.
I've really appreciated how you set up the therapy to be sort of failing our way to success.
Yeah.
That may be skipping ahead to the methods portion, but that concept has been tremendously valuable to me.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to be perfect, I can't do that.
Right.
But I can fail. I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it takes some pressure off, and I can just be more myself.
Yeah.
And
I love that. Now, how about the M equals methods?
Wait. Can we start with assessment of resistance first?
Oh, we did that first already.
Well, what about the paradoxical invitation as you move into resistance?
That's cool.
You're asking the patient if they want to, dive in and do the work, but then you're giving them all the reasons why maybe it's not a good idea to do that. So can you talk a little bit about the paradoxical invitation?
Well, Matt will do a masterful job with that. And the paradoxical invitation is particularly for people with habits and addictions or relationship problems. And the straightforward invitation is for depression and anxiety. And the paradoxical invitation is the most difficult technique to learn in TEAM CBT. And that's when at the end of empathy, the phase of the session, we ask the patient if they'd like to move forward and do some work, or if they just want to talk and have us listen. And if you sense the patient has a little bit of an ornery side, or they're kind of ticked off at their brother, their spouse, or somebody they're not getting along with, and they're complaining about that person, you want to issue an invitation, a paradoxical invitation. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Matt?
Sure. Yeah. For a relationship problem where oftentimes there's an element, or maybe always there's some element of blame that's occurring. I think a straightforward invitation can backfire because it'll feel like we're blaming them.
Yeah.
And the paradoxical invitation, which is where we would highlight what they stand to gain from what we have to offer, that they could have greater intimacy and closeness, and fewer conflicts, a greater degree of peace and harmony in their relationship. And then we go into the paradoxical component where we describe how that's probably undesirable to them, though, because then they would be getting close to someone who's treated them quite badly, and it wouldn't seem fair at all for them to have to do this work when the other person is setting them off and doing these things that are really intolerable. That if we highlight what they stand to gain, and then we try to take that away from them, we say, and so I would understand if you just didn't want to work on that with me, that they'll start to chase more. They'll reach out for what we're taking away.
Yeah.
I have an idea.
Beautifully said. What? Yep. Let's
do a role play, Matt.
Okay, Rhonda, sounds fun.
Okay. Okay, I'm coming to you for therapy. You're my therapist.
Okay,
and great. I'm talking to you about my husband, and I have a lot of complaints about him.
Michael, you're talking about again?
No, I'm making up a husband.
Pulling your leg.
Right now, Michael's walking. Michael's walking on water right now to me.
Yeah, that's great.
He's in the mat club.
Oh.
No, I have complaints about my husband because I ask him, he's recently retired and now he's home all the time. He's constantly in my way. He's coming into the kitchen. He's telling me I'm not cooking. He doesn't like the way I'm cooking. He wants to go to the grocery store. I don't like the things he's buying. I know it seems so petty, but it's hugely important to me. And, the level of his criticism of me for not doing things the way that he likes is just enormous and annoying. And we never got on each other's nerves when he was working because, he was gone all the time. But now that he's home, it's really a challenge.
Okay. Well, to go into empathy there with this patient a little bit. So it sounds like you're feeling pretty annoyed, and he's being quite critical of you. And I notice I'm feeling a little bit annoyed with him too when I'm just thinking about that. And I'm just really, really glad to have an opportunity to understand what this is like for you. And I could insert maybe empathy. I'd offer quite a bit more empathy before an invitation step. But then the invitation would be, I think I have some ideas. I've got some methods that would be effective for, improving your relationship with your husband and to be getting more of the version of him that is really approving of you and loving towards you and sweet towards you. And I'd be delighted to work with you on that problem if you wanted. And at the same time, you're saying that he's around and he's kind of in your business a lot and annoying and irritating, and I'm not sure you would want more of him in your life or more of that closeness. In fact, I would say it might be better if you had more distance from him. That seemed to be working pretty well. So maybe what I have to offer is something that we shouldn't be working on.
Well, I want distance from him in the kitchen, but not from the relationship.
What were you hoping for?
I want distance in the kitchen.
Okay.
But not in the relationship. I'd like to improve the relationship.
What would you want in the relationship?
I just want more peace and understanding and a conflict-free relationship.
Oh, more peace and understanding. And,
yes.
And less conflict. Well, I've got that to offer.
Oh.
And at the same time, it kind of seems unfair that you would have to do that work when he's being so critical of you. How would we justify you being the one to do that? Maybe he needs to go see his own therapist.
Yeah, maybe he needs to go see his own therapist.
Okay, well then what would you like to work on?
Well, no, I want to work on this too.
Let's stop and say what just happened. That's pretty cool. You can continue if you like, but what just happened, Rhonda?
I declined Matt's invitation because I agreed that it was unfair for me to do all the work.
Right, and then what happened?
Matt took the invitation away and asked me if I wanted to do some other work on something else. And then I got kind of like, no, I don't want to work on anything else.
Right.
I was more motivated to work on what I came in for.
Yeah.
I started arguing with Matt, sort of.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have for me to, do the work that he's offering.
Right, and that was a beautiful example of the paradox. Now let's just analyze that, because I could get it because I knew what was going on, but for some of our listeners, it might seem quite alien and foreign. That was a perfect example of a paradox. So I'll start it off, and you folks can throw your ideas in there too. Instead of, Matt, first of all, you dangled the carrot. You said, boy, I have some wonderful tools here, and we can definitely make this happen. But then you said, but on the other hand, it sounds like that would be unfair, because then you'd have to be doing all of this work, and maybe that's not what why should you have to do that? And then when you bought into that, Matt said, well, great, maybe we should work on something else. So he was becoming aligned with your subconscious resistance and wasn't trying to sell you on working on your husband and helping to change that relationship. Is that correct, Rhonda?
Yes, that is correct. He did not try to convince me that I should do anything.
What would have happened if he had tried to convince you?
I think I would have argued with him and been a little incensed that he thought I was wrong.
Yeah, or that you should have to change, or you know what I mean? Because you were seeing yourself as the victim and kind of morally superior to
I was the wronged person.
Yeah.
And I would have been wronging you even more.
Right.
Is that easy to learn how to do that, Matt?
No, I think this is the hardest thing to learn. And I think it's challenging to teach as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember how we used to do this in that Japanese restaurant in Los Altos? You'd be talking about a case, some kid who was referred by his wealthy father.
Yeah.
Trying to persuade the kid to change. And the kid had no agenda at all. And then you finally, got it and started having these amazing results. But it wasn't easy at first. But it was fun because this issue always came up in our supervision.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this is such an important part of the therapy, and I think it's almost imperceivable. Like, it's hard to see it at first. You were so skillful, and you would always see it right away. And when we would do the role play, you would just be brilliant at letting go in this very friendly and admiring way. And then I would always experience that pull. But no, I want some kind of change here in my life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I have another. If we're done with paradoxical meditation, I have another question about the pivot question, which comes after you filled out the daily mood log with your patient, where they identify the moment in time that was upsetting, their feelings related to that, and their negative thoughts. And then we've asked them, after they've identified all those, challenging feelings and negative thoughts, if we had a magic button and they could push this button and magically all of those thoughts and feelings would disappear, and without work on their part, and they say, they push the button, yes or no? And then we move into, I would be reluctant to have you push that button. And so that's another bit of paradox. We're reluctant to have our patient push the button to get rid of these negative thoughts and challenging, painful feelings. Can you talk about that kind of paradox?
And then we talk them into continue to hang on to the negative thoughts and feelings. To say, we don't have a magic button, but I've got some tremendous tools, then we probably could reduce your feelings and maybe even make them disappear entirely. But I don't think it would be a good idea. Maybe before we do that, we should make a list of what your negative thoughts and feelings show about you that's positive and awesome, number one. And number two, what are some advantages and benefits of your negative thoughts and feelings? And then if you do that skillfully, with most patients, you can come up with at least 20 totally different positives, because each negative feeling, they probably have 8 different kinds of negative feelings, like depression, anxiety cluster, inadequacy cluster, guilt and shame cluster, loneliness, hopelessness, frustration, humiliation, anger, all of that. And then each of those could have 2 or 3 positive aspects, and then each negative thought could have 2 or 3 positive aspects. So you can come up with a powerful list of positives, and then this is the paradox. To say, why would you want to press that magic button given all of these positives? Because when you press the button, all these positives are going to go down the toilet right along with your negative thoughts and feelings. Why in the world would you want to do that? And so we have really become the patient's subconscious resistance. And much of the reason, not all of the reason, but much of the reason people resist change is because of really beautiful things about them. Like, I used to beat up on myself all the time for failing with a patient, or if a research project wasn't coming along correctly, if something didn't turn out right, I'd get all upset. Well, all of those negative thoughts and self-criticisms and anxiety and angst that I put myself through did stimulate me to work really hard and with my patients and on my research. And so I came up with some pretty fantastic research papers and learn more and more techniques. But so if you had tried to convince me to give up that stuff early in my career, I would have said, go to hell. Maybe for you can lower your standards because you're not so great. But I'm not going to lower my standards. And now that I'm kind of older and have kind of accepted my many limitations, life has just become so much sweeter and more, more rewarding. I'm more creative now than ever in my career. But it's, people will fight against letting go of negative thoughts and feelings because they, in fact, do reflect or are generated by our value system. And until the person sees that, they won't be willing to change.
I feel compelled to share an experience that I frequently have as in the role of the therapist, where I can't see why the patient should continue doing what they're doing. It'll seem to me so upsetting to them, like they're so depressed, anxious, and I'm mostly going into, okay, let's list the advantages because that's what I've been trained to do.
Yeah.
Rather than I can see why this person shouldn't change. And what I've noticed is that if I just go ahead with that, even though I'm kind of faking it, after a period of time of writing down all the different advantages to maintain the status quo, I get it.
Yeah.
And I see why they shouldn't change.
It comes as an illumination suddenly.
Yeah, it's like a light goes off and I say, oh, I get it. Yeah, you shouldn't change. This is important. What you're telling yourself is super important. And the way you are right now is just perfect. And that's when they change.
Yeah. And that's as paradoxical as you can get.
That's pretty much as paradoxical as it gets, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. If you can think of any examples of that right now or at any time in our paradox, just do it, because that's illumination. We saw that in our work with Sonny Choi, Rhonda.
We did.
And we were just going mechanically through all the reasons, the good things about his anxiety had resurfaced. And he was telling himself he shouldn't be anxious again because he's worked this out, so many times in his life, when he came out as gay and when he gave up his engineering career and decided to become a mental health professional. Like, he was going against the grain and flying in the face of disapproval, and those times made him very anxious. But now suddenly he's anxious again, and he was saying, I shouldn't be like this because I'm a mental health professional and I'm an expert in treating anxiety, and I've overcome my anxiety twice already in my life. And so we were kind of mechanically going through, the reframing without any fireworks. And then I suddenly saw it, because his thought is, I shouldn't be anxious. And then I said, actually, Sonny, do you know why that's wrong? He said, no. I said, because you should be anxious. It's absolutely correct for you to be anxious. You can thank your lucky stars you're anxious, and you can be damn proud to being all anxious and panicky. And he says, what are you talking about? I said, because you just told us that you're making another huge change in your life. And you're going to give up working for an agency, and you're going to only work half-time. You're going to do things you believe in, and rather than things that you should be doing. So you're, flying now at a higher altitude. Wouldn't it make sense that you'd be anxious again? And isn't your anxiety a flattery for the courage that you're taking in your life right now. And he just saw it. And then suddenly the anxiety was gone, or it was just easy to blast his thoughts out of the water. But it's exactly what you said, and that's one of the potential problems with my new book, Feeling Great, is that there are tables to help you do positive reframing, but you can do it in a kind of a mechanical way, and it's really a matter of seeing something that will blow your mind and that will blow your patient's mind.
Yeah, it's maybe that is maybe part of the paradox is that we think we're supposed to be in this role of teaching, and really it's when we're in the role of learning that we're most helpful.
Oh, that's another paradox. I love that. Well, how about M equals methods? There couldn't be any paradoxes there, because when we do use methods, our goal is to be successful.
I think the recovery circle is paradoxical in that because we don't know what method will be most effective for a given individual, our task is to fail as quickly as possible. And that if we're failing as quickly as possible, really giving each method a good hearty try, that arrives at success a lot faster.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't add to that. It seems perfect. So Rhonda will add to that.
Then there are certain methods that are paradoxical within them, like the double standard technique is paradoxical.
Yeah, because the patient is doing the work of change throughout. Like when we're doing externalization of voices or double standard, like Tuesday night we were working with a therapist, and I won't say his name or anything, but who had a horrible traumatic event growing up, seeing his parents fight horribly, and then his family broke up that day, and he was 8, and he said my childhood was ended. And then he's had all these negative thoughts about himself ever since. And I shouldn't have hid with my brother when they were fighting. I should have gone in to help my mother. I'm an effing coward, and I'm totally screwed up now. I'm more screwed up than anyone else in the Tuesday group. And then when we went to double standard, I had him play his adult self, and I played the role of him as a little boy, and 8, and said, "Isn't it true that I shouldn't have hidden? Isn't it true that I'm an effing coward? Isn't it true that I could have saved my mother from my monstrous, violent father who was drunk?" And stuff like that. And then he started talking me out of it. And I kept saying, "Yeah, but isn't this true? You're just being nice to me. Isn't it true that I really am an effing coward? Isn't it true that I really am screwed up?" And then he got stronger and stronger and stronger until he finally just hit the ball out of the park. And it was really a tremendous thing. But again, it was totally paradoxical, because I was not trying to help him. I was just being his negativity, and he was the one who had to turn it around. And most of our techniques work like that, like the feared fantasy. You meet the monster you've been afraid of, and you have to defeat the monster through the use of the acceptance paradox. Be specific, whatever.
Yeah, it strikes me that all exposure is paradoxical.
Yeah. Oh, right.
That it seems like exactly the wrong thing to do to face our fears. It feels wrong.
Yeah, it feels terrifying.
It feels terrifying. I never want to do exposure, and yet that's precisely the right thing to do.
Right. So would it be fair to say that TEAM is an almost entirely, not entirely, but an almost entirely paradoxical approach, maybe the most paradoxical form of therapy ever developed?
I would sign on that dotted line, yeah.
Yeah. And
then David, can I ask you this one? But why how did you come up with the idea to infuse TEAM with paradox?
Well, it just kind of evolved. A lot of little things started, added up over the years of times when I'd see someone who made a real breakthrough, because I was always measuring. You see, that helped me. So I could, and you too, Matt, I always knew when I was screwing up or when I was hitting home runs, and I started to notice, certain things when I was hitting home runs, things that were really helpful to me. For example, both in my teaching and in my therapy, I think when I grew up, I kind of had this perceived perfectionism, thinking that I had to impress people to make them like me. And then I began noticing that in teaching, you have to have good stuff to offer, or it's a waste of time. But I began to notice that when I would disclose my failures and vulnerabilities, or describe a patient, and then tears would come to my eyes or something like that, that suddenly the programs took a whole different dimension. People felt close to me, and it wasn't just good teaching, but it was magic. And then I see that too in the Tuesday group. In the training, we see paradox happening every time we do live work, because most of the students, the therapists actually in our Tuesday group, inwardly, I know you guys have never felt this way, but a lot of them inwardly feel insecure, like I'm not good enough, and some of them are at Stanford and where they're supposed to be impressing people, so they hide their feelings a lot, and then there's a kind of loneliness. And then in the Tuesday group, they open up and share how they really feel inside, expecting everyone is going to judge them when they find out that they're socially insecure and, whatever, or that I had a troubled childhood and I've been ashamed, ever since I was 8 and things. And then they discover not only that people don't judge them, but the people seem to love them and feel close to them. And that blows people's minds. And it's another paradox, which is a spiritual or religious paradox, and it's expressed differently in different religions. Like the Buddha might have called it the death of the self, or others might call it death and rebirth, or whatever. Or, Beck used to call it emotional alchemy, that we turn your emotional mud into gold. But these are just different metaphors, and what it means is that people discover that the part of yourself that you're the most ashamed of, that you think is the worst, that you've been hiding maybe for decades from people, that is actually your gold, your diamond, that when you let that out of the closet and you share your vulnerability with people, that the kind of heavens open up and the thunder and the lightning it's a very quiet but very thunderous event. And that's another spiritual paradox that I would say is at the base of TEAM. And the reason I say it's spiritual, because I'm not a big religious advocate, as you know. I'm kind of an enemy of religion, I would say, is more accurate. But that there's spirituality in different religions, and the certain things where psychology is working, but things take on a very deep and powerful, sudden transformation of someone's life, that there's almost always spiritual dimensions and paradoxes going on, and the person can suddenly understand things that they didn't understand before about their own religion, whether that's Jewish religion or Christian religion or Islamic or Hindu or Buddhist or whatever. I think that's
just beautifully said, David. Yeah. I wanted to answer Rhonda's question from my perspective. One thing that's really sold me on the idea of using paradox was when I realized something about it, which is that it's really a win-win scenario for me. This is very selfish, but if I'm siding with the resistance, then it's win-win. Either the patient will talk back to me and they'll start to recover and change will start to happen, and that'll be one type of magic, or they'll experience it as I really get them. I really understand them. And that's another type of deep empathy, which is another win. And I don't have to go through all this struggling with them or fighting them or creating resistance in them. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, I really want to dedicate as much of my time as possible to embracing this way of being with my patients, is to really see what's great about the status quo and why change is no good, and to be on their team.
Yeah, exactly. And you can say those words and people can get it or not get it. There's something, those words are referring to something very, very powerful. One way I like to put it is that the neat thing about TEAM is it's impossible for patients to resist me now.
Yeah.
And it's such a relief, because I spent years fighting with patients. And now if the patient says, I don't want to change, I say, God bless you. You've got a lot of good reasons to change, and I hope you'll come up with some problem we can work on, because I really like you, but I'm not here to change you against your will whatsoever. And it's another thing. You become humble, but you become powerful at the same time.
I'd be curious your thoughts on why is it so challenging to use Paradox, and can it go wrong? Are there dangers to this?
Well, there's tons of dangers, as you know. You can use it in a gimmicky way. Everything in TEAM is powerful and can be used for good or evil. Every technique and every idea has a shining, beautiful side and a dark side. But a narcissistic, manipulative therapist would probably view Paradox as a way of manipulating or tricking the patient, and
or even putting the patient down.
Oh yeah. Oh, that happens all the time too, and that's the ugly side of it. Another time where we probably wouldn't do it would be, as you know, Matt, when working with a suicidal patient. I mean, the paradoxical things for hopelessness and so forth can be incredibly helpful, but that's where we have to put our foot down and say, I'm not going to let you commit suicide, and if you're actively suicidal right now, then I'm going to call the police and have you involuntarily hospitalized. We don't, paradoxically say to somebody, go ahead and commit suicide. So that would be another area where there could be abuse. I apologize that my phone's ringing, but it's done now.
Yeah. I think that's a good example. So if we were to just say, I guess it sounds like suicide is actually the best option for you.
Yeah.
That it would be communicating that we don't really care about them or their life. And,
that's right. Yeah. And all in TEAM has to be done with compassion. It's a highly technical form of therapy, as you both know, but without the compassion, it's not going to be effective. Compassion alone isn't going to cure almost anyone of almost anything. Empathy and compassion are good, but they don't cure anything. But you've got to have them, for ethical reasons, for everybody's comfort, as well as for the patient to trust you and use these powerful techniques. I wish we could, get this word out to the world and to therapists. I found it very difficult to train therapists. You picked it up really fast, Matt, although you were a slow learner, and you probably have a 200 IQ or something like that. And Rhonda, you're smart as can be. You said it took you 3 years to catch on to, paradoxical agenda setting or assessment of resistance.
Yep.
I'm still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it took me years to figure it out, and I didn't have anyone helping me. I was just fighting with patients for the first 7 years, and then it began to dawn on me, gosh, what am I doing this for? And but it took me a long time to figure it out. And you were wagging your finger.
I'm wagging my finger because we've been over an hour, and I think you're both. Matt, thank you so much for asking that question. But when is it contraindicated to use Paradox? That's a great question. And
thanks, Rhonda.
Yeah, I think this was a really great episode, and I think it's just time to end it.
Yeah. Well, paradoxically, we need to go on for another hour then.
Yeah. Right. Well, you remember what the Buddha said
about ending the podcast? What is that?
Just many 2,500 years ago, he put it like this: Shut up, David.
Okay, well, thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Matt, for coming.
Thanks, Matt. It's such a joy.
Yeah.
Great spending time with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Till next time. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.